Hey guys, I promised that I would do a follow-up on my identity awakening, and it's been a long time, so I had a request specifically to do that, so I'm going to do it. Again, it's probably going to be rambling and tangential because I'm totally doing it off the cuff, and all this stuff happened 3 years ago, and it was like a lot of things happening at once. So bear with me. And when I left off in the last one, I had just split up from my husband, and so this was the very end of September of 2014. A lot of things started coming into focus after he left. A big one was that I had heard in my life 3 times the most beautiful female voice you could possibly imagine, who told me the future of events to come in my life. And the first time, I had been 9 years old, and I can remember it clear as a bell. I was looking outside of the window of the mobile home I was living in, looking at my dad and sister playing outside, and this voice suddenly, it was like it came from here, and told me that my father was going to die, and it was going to be while he was working. And he was a tractor trailer truck driver, so I don't know, I was a little kid, it scared me. It was something I carried around, that like, oh my god, my dad's gonna die while he was at work, but I didn't take it too seriously until I was 16, and that's exactly what happened. And the next time the voice came to me, I was about 23 years old, and I had recently moved back to Connecticut from a couple of years I'd been living in England, and I was unhappy to be back here. And I was thinking about moving to California. Again, I remember exactly where I was and what I was doing, and the voice said that I couldn't leave, that I had to stay in Connecticut because my mother was going to get sick, and I was the one who was going to have to take care of her. I thought, well, okay, that same exact voice was right before, but mind you, I didn't believe in like the spiritual realm or psychic phenomena or anything like that. I'll get to that later. Like, there's a lot of different things that were happening throughout my life that I just repressed, or just kind of compartmentalized and decided to not think about because it conflicted so deeply with my worldview. And then before my mom did get sick, I heard that voice again. And at that time I was about, I'm going to say 27 or 28. And at the time I was, one of many times in my life, I was seriously contemplating suicide. And how, I mean, it wasn't like I was just going to do it. I had a plan of where it would have to be, so, you know, it would only be police that would find me, and blah, 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 blah. And the voice said that I couldn't kill myself, that I had to wait. Just wait until you're 36, because when you're 36, you'll know the truth. And I really took that to heart. And I obviously didn't do anything to hurt myself. So my mom got sick when I was 34, and it was true that it ended up being me. My sister just couldn't deal with it, so it was just me to take care of her. And then as far as knowing the truth when I was 36, right? So, I mean, there were a lot of times between 28 and 36 when I just wanted to end it all. But I always thought of that voice. And when I was 36, I was just waiting for something huge to happen. And that ended up being one of the most difficult years of my life. That was the year, I'd call it the year I was married. I was only married for 14 months. And when I was 36, that's when I learned the truth about, or started to learn the truth about how the world works. Like, that was my, I don't know what you'd call it, like, not my identity awakening, but like the kind of awakening most people have, of, you know, learning about the so-called like Illuminati, pardon me, and all of that kind of stuff that I've talked about in other videos. But that still wasn't enough to convince me that that was a good enough reason not to off myself, because if anything, it seemed like an even better reason to do it. And it wasn't really until I was 37 that I started learning the truth about who I was. I had to make it through that really difficult year, and that voice I had heard 3 times in my life was, oh, it was kind of the grounding for me coming to believe that maybe I did have some kind of clairaudient or clairvoyant kind of abilities, and that that there was a spiritual realm that knew what was going to happen before I did. So, back to, let's call it October. I mean, okay, for a couple months a few months, I've been seeing a therapist, and her name is Yelenia, or Jelena, and I've written about her a lot. She is the incarnation of my 12th dimensional sister goddess Bliss, and don't cry, and of my sister as Psyche, flesh. And when I was 5 or 6, I used to have visions of a little blonde girl with blue eyes, and I always called her in my head my Russian friend. I don't know, and I don't even know how much like we talked to each other. It was that I would see her and we would share feelings, and you know, it wasn't something I gave a whole lot of thought to after I stopped having that experience. But then it was her, grown up, looked exactly like her. So Yelena was also like kind of into the whole spiritual awakening thing, and we would talk to each other about that stuff. I just felt this intense closeness with her, and we started having all these weird synchronicities between us. Like, I kept showing up for our appointments at 11:11, and to the point where it was like a joke between us. And eventually it got to the point where she said, like, I can't be your therapist anymore. I feel like I'm learning more from you than you are from me. And we just made plans to hang out and be friends. We were texting each other, and like, we were both just, I don't know, seeing things and putting like puzzle pieces together about incarnated angels and light workers and twin flames and things like that. So I had that relationship with her. And then I was, at the same time, I was really keen on getting breast implants. So I went to a cosmetic surgeon in my town. I was living in Glastonbury. And this man was the most fascinating, brilliant, complicated man. Fucking genius. And we ended up just having these really deep and meaningful conversations during my consultations, until he finally ended up giving me an important puzzle piece about Joseph of Arimathea in the Bible, and how that related to Glastonbury, England, and the Holy Grail, the cup of Jesus's blood kind of thing, symbolizing the bloodline of Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene. And that piece fit in really important with a few other people I'd met who were giving me other puzzle pieces. And then I went into Yelena, and I even like drew up this poster board explaining like how I'd come to realize, holy fuck, like, it's me, like, I'm the Da Vinci Code. And there are so many pieces to that puzzle. Everything from like my name and Heather and the ether and hydrogen and helium being H and HE being the first elements to come out of the Big Bang, and my birth date being 7/18/77, 777, and 18 being 666. And I don't think I knew about the 923 thing yet, but there are just so many things. And I lay this all out for her, and she just like, kind of like my husband had, gone blank. And then that was it. Like, it was awkward, and I left the session, and we never ended up talking to each other again. I reconnected with this girl that had been on the psych ward with me when I was detoxing from heroin. That was January 2014. She was, oh my gosh. She and I had this amazing connection. She was 19 years old. I was 35, and it didn't matter. Like, we were just, souls were meeting up again. At the time, I didn't believe in any of the spiritual stuff, but like, we kind of got in and out of being friends over the time, and when I reconnected with her, I was like, holy shit, I've got some stuff to tell you. And she was like, what? Like, that all sounds really crazy. And then one of my best friends from high school, Megan, I realized she was one of my sister goddesses, Liberty, and she was my other sister as Psyche. My sisters as Psyche are flesh and free will, and she was an incarnation of my sister Flesh. And I just, at that point, I'd gotten so much rejection that I was afraid of telling her. And when I told her, like, she told me it made sense to her, and that she'd been having some experiences, and she was starting to look back at some of her life experiences and putting puzzle pieces together. So then we had some like weird experiences together where, like, I did an exorcism on her apartment, and I was like, okay, she's in it with me. And then, I mean, I'm going out of sequence on this, but one of the most important connections I'd made, like, actually, I think he was the first person that I told who I was my ex-husband's best friend from childhood. His name is Mike Harvey, and he is the god of loyalty. And loyalty is love's, like, the father's best friend. And he was the best man at our wedding. So for him to be supportive of me after, you know, his best friend and I just split up in a pretty acrimonious way was a big deal. And that he fucking believed me. Like, it was so scary that I wasn't getting any kind of external support on this. And he was there for me, like, several times. He was really a good friend to me. Alright, so it's so hard to explain. So much was happening at once. Like, so I was living in this house that had been told to me was my house. And I was living in it alone. My husband had left. And I felt the presence of a godly being around me that I kept thinking was Zeus. And at this time I didn't know I was Psyche. Like, it just was like, it felt like my father, like my late father, but also somehow I was connecting it to Zeus somehow. And that was the first godly being that I felt was guiding me. And I would sometimes be told to put like a pen or a marker in my hand and put it to paper, or if it was a dry erase marker, to put it to like a window or like the microwave, some kind of glass. And just words would come out of my hand. It's called automatic writing. And sometimes it would tell me like really comforting things, like to relax and that everything was going to be okay, to not be scared. And other times it was like information. It was like it was pulling out information from all of these disparate things I'd been learning over the past year and tying it all together so I could start to see the thread between everything. And it was I just started seeing how all of the different mythologies and faiths were telling the same story, but just from different angles, which was telling the same story as science and space and like microbiology, like everything. Because I was, before my political awakening, if you will, for the past 2 years before that, I was like deeply into learning about science and like theories about multidimensionality and multiple worlds and timelines and quantum physics and like, you know, in like a layman's kind of way, obviously. But all of this was just coming together and it made sense. And more, I could recognize that my life had somehow been some kind of weird epicenter for it all. And looking back on my childhood, my whole life, like I always knew that there was polarity to it. I never put the word to that, but like I'd always lived in sort of like extremes, or I was the odd one out. Like my entire life I had gone to private schools, but I was the kid that was there on scholarship. And I was often the only brown kid in my class until I was older. And even then, you know, there weren't too many of us. Just like how I never quite fit in, but I did. It was always just extremes and polarity and duality, and then that all made sense, which made sense why I had, the day after my 36th birthday, been compelled to get this yin-yang tattoo on my finger. Like, I don't know. I think I'll stop here and get my thoughts back together so I can do a part 4. Hang in there with me. Trying to explain it the best I can. I do a lot better writing than I do speaking, so if you really want more of the full story, it's on my Facebook page, and I'll put the link below. And I started writing about this stuff in, I want to say it was December of 2014. And then from there, like that beginning part, there's a lot of like wrong information in there, like stuff I totally didn't understand yet, but if you want to like walk through my awakening, it's there on the internet. But anyway, I love you guys so much, and thanks for hanging in there.